Alrighty, so I've got another deck guide here for you. This time it's going to be all about Jabba Green, and it's actually going to cover two different versions of this deck. I'm going to talk about an ECL version and a Data Vault version, so you'll have some extra content and the ability to pick which one of these two versions you like better. Before we get going, though, please hit that subscribe button, and if you're interested in some more content from me, including live deck updates to this deck and a bunch of others, do check out my Patreon as well. All right, so this is how I'm going to start this deck guide. It's going to start with why Jabba, why are we playing this leader, and then I'll talk a little bit about the bases, ECL and Data Vault, some strengths and weaknesses to this archetype, and then I'll cover both deck lists, and there is a lot of similarity between them, but I'll call out the differences as we go. Following that, we'll cover some in-game strategy things like the early turns and the leader ability, what we're trying to do on the flip turn, how we protect Jabba, who is pivotal to our strategy, and then how we transition into the end game after we flip and how we close out the game, essentially. I'll do a little bit about how to manage ECL in the ECL version and wrap this up with ideas for sideboarding and other options, ways that you might be able to tweak this deck in the future. All right, so why Jabba? So what this leader does, specifically when he's deployed, is allows you to leverage very powerful board-centric control with units, creating a lot of 2-for-1s with your units, or letting a lot of units kind of trade up as long as they can survive their attacks. So he is vital to this strategy. We're using a lot of units with ambush to kind of turbocharge this ability, because ambush units typically come in, they hit something and they survive. Then you're basically getting 2 shots with them, right? They can shoot into the space if there's units up there. They can shoot twice into the same unit. If a unit's shielded, for instance, the first attack can knock the shield, and then the rest can kill the unit. Leaders who happen to have lower attack and high health, a lot of these ambush units can just one-shot leaders no matter what the power of the ambush unit is. We also get some synergies with self-damage, like Death Trooper. Essentially, this is a unit-based board control. It doesn't play so much like other blue-green villainy decks that you've seen that play many more events. It is something like a Kira deck, but even Kira is going to play a lot more events, you'll see, than I am playing here, because units in conjunction with Jabba's deploy are our removal. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. Mid-rangey board-centric control. Post-rotation, how is this going to look? The reason I'm kind of talking about Data Vault here is specifically because ECL will rotate after rotation. So even if you like that version a little better, if you end up liking this leader, Data Vault's not going away. Green 30's healths are also not going away. So there will be room to transition there. Some of these ambush units like Vader and Maul are going away, but a lot of the pieces aren't, and hopefully we get some more units that we can kind of fill up the rest of this curve, but for that, can't speak to it yet. So right now, let's focus on this set and see what we can do. All right, so why would we choose the ECL version? Of course, giving up 8 health difference is huge for a deck like this, but ECL does let you kind of turn the corner much quicker, especially in conjunction with the 2 units you see here. Gunship for space, Darth Vader for the ground. Now, Darth Vader in this deck is absolutely broken when he ambushes. Can actually kill 3 units at once, because you can put his shield on some other unit, Jabba, for instance, who you want to protect anyway, have Darth Vader attack into something. He takes damage and kills that unit. His on-attack trigger kills a shielded unit, and then Jabba's redirect can kill a 3rd unit. So there are some absolute blowout plays you can do here. Gunship can do a 3-for-1 as well, but the units have to be much smaller. But it gives us a lot of play into space decks, having a devastating Gunship ambush. There's not a lot of other specific ambush units I am playing in the current list, although in the other options section you will see some other ones, like Gideon, for instance. You can play more units that synergize well with Energy Conversion Lab, but right now, 6 copies between these 2 cards, and then some other things like Death Trooper can do a pretty good ambush, and some other like utility ones that sometimes squeak in there. But this is the main focus, and it's to create really busted plays Unfortunately, sometimes they don't line up in any specific game situation, right? You don't have Vader when you needed it, or the opponent's in space, and we drew Vader, but we didn't draw the gunship and things like that. So it adds a little more tension there. So you get more upside, but also more downside, because in the games where you can't leverage this base, you are giving up a ton of health in order to use it. And then why Data Vault? Well, with Data Vault, we're not getting nearly as much power from something like Vader or devastating gunship. So we need to kind of figure out what to do. We're playing Data Vault because we have 8 extra health, which is a huge amount of health. It's insane how much more health that is than ECL. But because we can't ambush gunship, for instance, Eye of Scion makes a lot of sense for me in the main deck. Same with Agent Callus, extra ground ambushers that don't need an ECL for us to be able to turn that corner earlier. And, Callus might be good enough in ECL, and Eye of Scion would certainly be in the sideboard of the ECL version for space decks. But because we don't have these ambushes with ECL, we need a little more redundancy for units early in the curve so that we can ambush before we get to like a timely intervention play with Vader. We also have extra space in this deck to play some more utility cards, things like Chancellor Palpatine, who may make an appearance in the ECL, although in the one you'll see in a moment didn't have space for it. I can fit it here. I can fit more top end like a Devastator and an Avenger in a Data Vault deck. And we're going to need it because we can't turn the corner nearly as quickly because we don't have these turbocharged ECL plays. So we're going to be behind on board for longer periods of the game until we usually get to like 7R, which is where we can start ambushing things like Vader and Maul. And in ECL, if we get a powerful ECL play, we try to turn the corner around there. We're only just establishing control there when we're playing Data Vault. So this extra room means more top end, which is we're going to need it because we're going to play a longer game, more ways to protect Jabba potentially with Palpatine, and more units to ambush. Some strengths and weaknesses. So you can snowball boards crazy with this deck just because of how powerful Jabba is once he's deployed. He's a lot better than my first instinct was when I read him. Now, I still don't love his leader ability, but he's very powerful when he's played. Ramp, it's another thing. It's not like a Jabba-specific thing, but he leverages it really well because he's a 5R leader in a blue-green villainy deck. And there's a lot of flexibility for modifying this deck because you'll see in the other options, there's tons of units with like ambush and stuff that you can fit in. There's different kinds of removal that you can fit in. There's different ways to protect Jabba we can fit in. And, you can't put it all in the deck, but the deck does have flexibility to target some metas, and you have a large card pool to draw from. It's also really fun to see these like 2-for-1 and 3-for-1s happen turn after turn when Jabba's in play. All right, some weaknesses though. It does suffer a bit from the wrong half syndrome, and this is something that a few decks have. And the issue here is because you are so tailored into creating these like unit-based board interactions, if you don't have the right arena unit, right? You don't have a space unit when you need it, or a ground unit when you need it, or like the right ambush unit. You need a Vader, but you drew an 8th brother, or vice versa. You don't have the gunship or the supremacy tie. It's much more apparent in a deck like this because it is a reactive deck when you are drawing the wrong half of the deck. This is something that's like not quite as extreme as it potentially is in like a Dryden deck. If you've played Dryden, you know how this can feel because you need first of all, you need like expensive cards and cheap cards, right, to trigger your ambushes. And then you also need like the ones that ambush in space and the ones that ambush in the ground. And sometimes you don't have the ground one at the right time, or you don't have the expensive card at the right time. And all these kinds of like wrong half syndrome happen, and it happens in this as well. It is a very redundant deck, and of course it is much more geared to fighting on the ground, especially in the main deck configuration. I think there's a lot you can do to make this better into space. There's a lot of space ambushers that you can play. There's a lot of things from the ground that can shoot up into space. There's a new space board wipe, but I think it will at least start a little weaker there because if you want to play into your strengths, it's mostly ground-based interaction. Another weakness here, it's very dependent on Jabba living. And, he has 8 health. There's very few things that can one-shot him, but there are decks that can, pound some damage into him when you flip, then try to remove him the next turn. And if you only get like one turn use out of him, it's often not enough. So we're going to have to try to find ways to bulk him up or make him survive or protect him, especially the turn he flips, because if he can stay healthy for a turn and then we start our wrecking crew of ambush and stuff like that, he can stick around longer. One note here that, it's going away soon. Pretty happy about that, but ECL with Poe will do 8. And, it's unfortunate that an aggro deck can one-shot your Jabba on curve. There's ways that we can try to mitigate that with different additions and sideboarding tools, but even like playing plot upgrades doesn't do anything, because guess what? Poe also blows up upgrades when he's attacking, so there is a weakness there. I don't know how popular a Poe ECL deck might be, but there's a few different versions of it that are going to be around, and if it's very popular, we're going to need to make modifications for sure to address that. And then while the deck is very flexible in deck configuration, it's not so flexible in game. As I mentioned, it ties a little into the wrong half syndrome. Your lines are often like very specific. You need the right ground unit at the right time, and that's going to be the play. There's actually a lot of flexibility maybe in the earlier turns of what you're doing, but like post flip, we're just trying to play like a chunky guy on curve a lot, and there's not a lot of tools to like change that core gameplay while the game is going. All right, let's take a look at the deck list. We'll start with ECL here. You'll see timely interventions mostly to give us extra redundancy for those ambushes. Darth Vader and Devastating Gunship will still be able to ambush later in the game and things like that. Our early turn plays are Pershing. Pershing's Pershing. He draws you cards. He even like helps synergize with Jabba's ability. Dark Trooper, just one of the better turn 1 plays we can possibly play. Inferno 4 as the only turn 1 space unit, although we could play an Onyx Brute if we wanted 6 copies. And then Lobot, who's, again, really nice here as well, because he's going to be able to soak up some damage and then hopefully kill something back or trigger Jabba's ability. And he's also really key in protecting Jabba on the flip turn as well. So sometimes you want to hold him in hand for that flip turn. You see Jar Jar Binks here. He's not really a turn 1 play. He is there for the flip turn as well to protect Jabba, make him less appealing to attack into, give you another unit in case your opponent's playing things like Power of the Dark Side. He can buff the Sentinel Lobot if it's in play already. It's a pretty good utility card, and that's why he's there. But mainly it's protection for Jabba. At the 3s, besides ramp, which of course is very key here, we have Death Trooper, who's one of the best early plays that you can make with Jabba on his flip, because we're not doing anything crazy on 5R with Jabba, but Death Trooper being able to be played on Jabba's flip, especially after we played Jar Jar, so we can do like flip, play Jar Jar, then Death Trooper. Trooper shoots himself, shoots something else. You actually end up doing 4 damage with that attack. Death Trooper is absolutely amazing in this deck. We got Supremacy Tie. We're going a little extra space. This is a decent ambusher on turn 2 sometimes if your opponent starts with like A-Wing, basically any unit that you survive into, and it's going to be key in conjunction with Devastating Gunship to get extra space into play early, so that once you're on the ground, you can start using things like Barrage and Craving Power to finish off space units. Power of the Dark Side, very good removal. Again, it's something we can build a 5 resource turn with Jabba, with Jar Jar Binks. It's why we're picking Jar Jar and not something like Chancellor Palpatine, who costs 3, although he is certainly going to be an option. I'm going to talk about him later. He's going to be in the Data Vault version. Gunship and Darth Vader are our key ambushers. These can both create 2 or 3 for 1s with ECL once Jabba's in play. Sometimes you just need to play Gunship before you even flip Jabba. That's totally fine as well. It can 2 for 1. And we're going 3 Craving Power and 2 Barrage. And Craving Power, this is fantastic at protecting Jabba, turning him into a 4/10, turns him into a real unit. Then all of a sudden, his next turn, if you'd like Barrage or Craving Power again, he's hitting for true chunks of damage. He's going to stick around even longer. At 6R, we have Vader and Eighth Brother. Eighth Brother for when we either used the ECL or didn't draw the Vader, but also a fantastic unit that can kill 2 things at once with Jabba out, or kill something really chunky on attack, basically finish off any leader. And then we've got 3 Vaders, 7 drop, and 2 Mauls. These are kind of our closers, you see that there's nothing really bigger than this in the deck, right? The goal here isn't to draw out a game, it's to like completely demolish the board between like 5 and 7R and just like snowball from there. And this should be enough to clear out the game as long as you did your job with Jabba. And if Jabba dies really easily, that's going to be a big problem because you're not going to be able to kind of clean up the board as efficiently, which means the game will prolong. And if the game prolongs too long, the top end here is just not built to deal with that. And, you know, you see the main deck here is a little light to space, certainly. I don't think it's complete dead to that. But I do recommend if you're going to take this into like a tournament or a local, make sure to check out the other options portion of this video and sideboarding, where I do recommend a large portion, maybe about 6 cards, should be dedicated to space decks. Things like Eye of Sion as a 3 of is certainly going to be something I recommend, and you will see in one moment that the Data Vault version does have 3 Eye of Sions in the main deck. But here's the Data Vault version, and it's not a lot different, right? First of all, we're just adding copies of some of these cards, right? You see the 3rd Eighth Brother, you see the 3rd Timely Intervention. Like, that's not major changes. I've already called out earlier, we're playing some more units with just ambush, like Aging Callus and Eye of Sion are just in the deck. And we've also added Chancellor Palpatine into the mix here to help protect Jabba. It's something I do want to consider in the ECL version as well, which is a little light on space. It's a little difficult to add filler cards like this because the list is very tight, and we do need the proper amount of finishers and units, the proper amount of like early game stuff, and he kind of didn't fit yet, but he's something I would consider. And then I've also added a couple extra top end in 1 Avenger and 1 Devastator, because like I said, I expect the game to go on a little longer. Past that, this deck's basically the same, right? It's just 10 more cards, but it's just, that's it. It's filling out some of the curve, adding some ambushers, and adding some top end. And then you've got yourself the Data Vault version. All right, so how do we manage our early turns here? We do want to prioritize ramp. You're not going to hard mulligan for it, but you are going to like mulligan for it a decent amount of the time. Early on, we do have a lot of different units we can play against aggressive strategies. We'd rather just play things like Lobot or the 3/3, the Trooper, against any deck that might go a little slower. Purging is fantastic. We can also start in space sometimes if we need to. And on turn 2, we can often go a 2-drop and use Jabba's ability if our opponent was forced into either attacking one of our things or if we had Purging to self-trigger. We do have ways to kind of fill that curve, and that same is going to be true on the 4-resource turn if we haven't ramped, where we can do something like a Death Trooper and then get an extra damage with Jabba's ability. But overall, especially in the ECL version, you have more room to mulligan for ramp. You're more likely to find it in the Data Vault if you have like good interaction, maybe Power of the Dark Side, like Purging. You just get a little more creative with how you're gonna deal with this. But the goal here is to keep something in play in anticipation for the leader flip, and then prepare a way to safely flip this Jabba. You might have to flip into traffic, but if you have a plot card or a sentinel, that's okay. If you have a Death Trooper left in hand, that's fantastic so that you can use it on the Jabba flip turn. If you have Callus in the Data Vault version, things like that. So you want to always prepare for what's going to happen on that flip turn. The leader ability, it's not very powerful. It's very rarely going to do 2 damage. It's just a little bit of a curve filler, especially early in the game. You don't use it that much, but don't forget about it because it has some like sneaky utility, especially after some things like ambush and survive later in the game. And, if Jabba's died, that's when the bigger things usually are in play and can soak up a little more damage. All right, on the flip turn, first and foremost, we're trying to protect Jabba. So if that means plotting out something like a Jar Jar or a Chancellor Palpatine, getting a Lobot into play, or playing Craving Power on him so that he can like make sure to stick around until the next turn. These are all valid. In the ECL version, devastating gunship on this turn can also be incredibly key if you're playing against a space deck. And of course, in the Data Vault version where you have Callus, or if you choose to put Callus into the ECL version, that would then give you another pretty powerful thing to do on 5R if you can safely flip without using any resources first. We also have Death Trooper. Mentioned him a lot, but he's fantastic on this turn, especially if you can do something else with the 2 resource, like a Jar Jar or a Lobot, something like that, because he can actually kill things, right? 4 damage with him when Jabba's in play is a lot. So this is, you're trying to set up here, like the flip turn, like turns 1 through 3 are like to set up the flip turn. The flip turn is here to actually set you up to like really go crazy with Jabba's ability, which is usually going to start around the 6R turn, and then kind of transition forward. And protecting Jabba, Sentinels, Craving Power, Jar Jar. I've mentioned every card here except Armor of Fortune. It's not in any of these versions, but I do think it's something you might want to look at. I think I would prefer it to Unveiled Might, because Armor of Fortune would still let you play a 3-resource play like Chancellor Palpatine or like Death Trooper, whereas Unveiled Might essentially just eats up the whole turn. And while you do get a 4/11, Jabba's power is actually not that relevant. We just need him to stay in play, and a 2/11 is going to be enough for that in many cases, while giving you more room to play other cards. But this is game by game dependent. Making sure this guy stays in play is really key. And as I mentioned, these upgrades aren't even going to protect you from his main prey, which is Poe. Like, Poe ECL is really unfortunate for him. And there we might just need something like Chancellor Palpatine to put up a Sentinel in front of Jabba, so that we can make sure we get at least 1 activation from Jabba the following turn before, Poe or Wrecker come down and kill him. And, those 2 cards will be gone next cycle while Jabba stays. So worst comes to worst and we can't figure out that 1 interaction, we wait a little. All right, managing ECL. Don't hold this too long. Like, if you have a decent ECL, don't get greedy, because if the board changes too much and then you don't have the right targets, all of a sudden you're just playing with 8 less health, right? Sometimes that Supremacy tie early, it's just going to be a good play to make. Yeah, Vader's not going to come down and do his thing, but you're going to save yourself a lot of damage. You're going to gain board control and things like that. But as mentioned, the main uses here are Vader. He's like the #1 use, and he can kill units in space, but there are decks that play only in space, and that's where the gunship is going to be your best one, and then you get redundancy with your timely interventions if you need them. So try to set this up with Vader. Remember the 5 damage breakpoint. So like if you can chip some damage on something that has more than 5 to make sure that Vader can like one-shot it, that's great. Remember that when using him, if you want him to take any damage, you put the shield on something else so that he takes damage and then can reflect it with Jabba's ability. Do note that Death Trooper can ambush for 7 in this deck, because he can do damage to himself first and then finish off the ambush if Jabba's in play, so he can one-shot a lot of leaders if needed. And there's just some flexibility, and don't get too greedy with this ambush. All right, finally, the post-flip stuff. So with the ECL, this is where Vader and 8th Brother come in. I mean, 8th Brother is going to be in both versions. And then we want to start chaining ambush units. You do want to claim early a lot of the time, because the idea here is never to give your opponent a chance to first action kill Jabba with anything. Even if they have a small unit in play, they could have a blaster or a surprise strike or overwhelming barrage themselves or whatever it may be. You don't want to take the chance and like just for like Jabba getting a 2 damage in or something like that. It's fine to claim early. You've got your 7-drop Vader in your hand. It doesn't matter if they play like another 2 or 3 drop. It's going to come down. It's going to kill 2 more units because of Jabba's ability. And then he's going to bring out another friend. And you're just going to kind of snowball the game out of control. But this falls apart entirely if you let Jabba die. So just don't take chances with that. Don't be greedy with with like base attacks or chipping damage, if it gives your opponent a chance to early claim and remove your Jabba. And this is especially true of like aggro decks that have ways to one-shot him. I've mentioned ECL and Poe, but it also true of games that are planning to go longer, that games against like Rey or Anakin, because they have ways to remove him. And if once they've removed him, their top end is going to be a lot better. So we can't let them get him off the board easily until we've established board dominance with our 7-drops. So that's kind of the main goal of our post flip, is to establish that board control with early claims. Once we have that, it's very difficult for your opponent to come back into the game. Once you have like a 7-drop in play, and maybe Vader brought out a person and Jabba's in play, and your opponent has nothing, like, they can't come back from this, because they can't both answer your threats and kill Jabba. So that whatever they do, they're going to put things into play, and then your next ambusher is going to like remove, add to the board. And if they won't need to spend so much energy on the Jabba, they're going to keep taking damage from the rest of the units that came into play. All right, let's wrap this up with some other options. So part of this is also sideboarding. And I will tell you, right now, I would almost certainly have like 3 Eye of Signs in the sideboard. I'd have some amount of Palp Return in the sideboard for games that are going to grind out more, and probably some combination of the capital ships will be in the sideboard. Data Vault probably doesn't need as many because it has a couple in the main deck, but the ECL is going to need some of these in some matchups. And then Hyperspace Disaster for the space matchups, I think will be pretty good, as well as the Architon's Assault Cruiser. Like, you can even do like 3 Eye of Sion, 2 cruisers, maybe like a Hyperspace Disaster or 2, and that's like 7 cards. Some of those will come in against other decks as well, especially the Architons will come in against any deck playing Home 1. So you get some overlap there, and then you play some stuff for control, maybe with Palp's Return or Relentless or Avenger. If you want a little more help against aggro, you've got options with like Eager Escort for early ambushes in space, more Chancellor Palpatines if you want that in the ECL version. You see some options here for Unveiled Might and Armor of Fortune. I do think Armor of Fortune is going to be better, but it has its weaknesses as well. You can look at more removal, like No Glory or Super Laser Blast, although, again, the focus here is Jabba and his units, and I don't know how much space there is for things like that. Another good ECL unit would be Gideon Hask. He would probably be my next favorite, because him coming down and potentially doing a double kill with ECL would then give you 2 experience tokens, and you probably just throw them on the Jabba, and all of a sudden you've pumped him, and he's more likely to survive moving forward. Callus can make an appearance in the ECL deck as well, as a unit that won't need to use your ECL. I think the only card I didn't mention yet is the Onyx Squadron Brute. Yeah, if you just want to replace one of the other turn 1 plays for extra space turn 1 plays, it's probably the next best option. All right, that's what I got for you for Jabba. I've had a lot of fun with this leader, and I think he's better than I first rated him. It's just his unit, when it's in play, is crazy powerful, while his leader ability leaves a lot on the table. It's not very good. That's probably what's holding him back more. But 8 health is incredibly sturdy, and you can do some really crazy plays with him once he's in play. So I think this deck's pretty solid. Well, both of these decks, and there's some room to maneuver it further once we know a little bit more about what the meta will look like. So let me know what you think of Jabba. Let me know any ideas you have for these decks, and until next time, take care.